Welcome to our monthly economic update. Are we in a recession or aren't we? This month, we take a look at economic growth, what's driving it, and what lies ahead. In recent decades, Australia was the envy of the economic world. From the early 1990s recession onwards, we had a 30-year window of positive economic growth, no recessions, subdued inflation, low unemployment, cash rates that still encouraged investment, and governments running budget surpluses. After the tough economic periods through the late 1970s and 1980s, it was, economically speaking, a great time to be alive. Of course, nothing lasts forever. The supply shock that was COVID saw our 30-year run end, and the subsequent supply shock from the invasion of Ukraine saw re-emerging inflation spike. The tools to cut inflation are fairly blunt. At its simplest, governments use fiscal policy by cutting their spending, and central banks use monetary policy of hiking interest rates. Both levers have been pulled, and et voila, inflation, which spiked to 7.8%, is seemingly returning towards target. If only it were that simple. These fiscal and monetary tools don't directly reduce inflation. That's a second-order effect. The first-order effect is to take the steam out of an economy. People and governments spending and investing less cuts demand, slows economic growth, lowers wage growth, increases unemployment. These factors are what causes inflation to fall, which is why the narrow path of controlling inflation without blowing up the rest of the economy is such a difficult path to tread. Let's talk about GDP, or economic growth. In Australia, our long history of performance was the envy of the world. Consider the US. In the early 2000s, with the tech wreck and the Asian financial crisis, it was hit much harder than Australia, just as it was hit much harder through the GFC. Australia has tracked a smoother path of economic growth. Looking ahead, however, and both economies have benign growth forecasts. With the steam being taken out of each economy, according to the IMF, neither is really likely to set the world on fire for the rest of the decade. But it's how the growth is being produced which is the most important, and what separates the US and Australia. And the US is doing a much better job of it than we are. We've used these updates previously to talk about productivity and how in Australia our productivity growth is weak. So consider GDP per capita. This means the amount of output each individual is contributing to economic growth. In America, output has lifted. There's a very clear increase in GDP per capita post-COVID. That is an economy genuinely back to work. Here in Australia, we can't say the same. GDP per capita was barely positive in the years prior to COVID, and for the past 5 quarterly readings has either been neutral or negative. So, we're in a recession in all but name. But how is this possible when the IMF forecast had both of our economies set to grow by similar amounts to the end of this decade? That's where you consider population growth. In Australia, the Reserve Bank confirms our annual population growth was 2.5% in 2023. More people, buying more, spending more, employed, paying their taxes. Overall, contributing to our economic growth and keeping it positive. In the US, we saw population growth of just 0.5% in 2023. So we have 2 countries, one sustainably increasing productivity to grow its economic output, with the other, its outcome is derived from policies which ultimately are not sustainable in the long run. The discussion for productivity in Australia isn't going away anytime soon, and the sooner we have it, the better. Thank you for watching.